My Travels in the Spirit World by Carolyn D. Larsen. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC. Part 3. My woman guide suddenly stopped. Here before us, on a bench, lay a shape twisted and deformed. Its motionless silence seemed horrible. The face was terribly distorted, and the limbs a random heap, yet I recognized with horror the face of one whose life once closely touched mine. I looked at the helper. Why had she shown me this man, the thought of whom brought up such painful memories? The helper's grave eyes met mine. "Can you not help him?" she said. "You once stood close to him on earth." For sympathy and love are necessary for even a spirit of a highly developed nature to assist an earthbound soul. "Yes," I said, "I was once close to this spirit, but I am so no longer." Yet, not to neglect a possible chance to be of aid, I conquered my antipathy sufficiently to touch him 3 times upon the head, calling him by the old familiar name. It was of no avail. He remained sunk in his stupor, and the helper said sadly, "I fear you can do nothing," knowing well the reason for my failure. For on earth I had contracted intense dislike for this person, nor could I yet shake off this repugnance. Hence there was between us no point of contact, for sympathy and love is the first step to spiritual help. The helper motioned me to follow, and again we slowly passed on towards the gates. Here my eyes caught sight of the figure of a young man, apparently of Latin race, reclining against the wall in a half-sitting posture. His features betrayed the terrible sufferings he had undergone, and which he was still experiencing. His eyes roved from side to side with an expression of sneering, malicious resentment which did not veil the hopeless despair in their depths. He had undoubtedly been scrutinizing those who entered for a long time in the hope of some assistance. Now his supplicating gaze was turned on me. But my recent experience told me that I could offer him no aid. As I was passing out, I turned and again reviewed the harrowing scene, and exclaimed sadly, and perhaps with a note of protest in my tone, "But why are all these here? Who's brought them to this terrible place?" "No one but themselves," said the helper gravely. "Their deeds have placed them there." I asked no more questions, but followed the helper in silence. I had now left behind not only the abode of highly developed spirits who wait only to be guided to higher planes, the thronging dwelling places of those earnestly striving for further spiritual growth, but also the depressing realms of earthbound souls. And now I came to the dwellings of a multitude of a quite different type. Here dwelt those who are not bound by material things of earth, but who are yet of but rudimentary spiritual development. On earth, these people were respectable, trustworthy, and even kind. Evil did not tempt them. They lived the pleasant life of the pleasant portion of the world. If they thought of their spiritual life at all, it was with approval, for they were good citizens, were they not? but on the whole they gave little consideration to the things of the spirit. Most certainly they did not prefer the unseen things to the seen and known. Their souls were fallow fields season after season. They did not grow noxious weeds, but neither did they ripen the golden wheat of the soul. Hence, though now in a realm where infinite possibilities open ahead, their progress is slow. They live as on earth, in pleasant houses, with delightful gardens, surprisingly like their surroundings here, in touch with friends to whom they are courteous and neighborly, dressing as they did on earth, and distinguished by the bright and cheerful colors of their aura, in strong contrast to the earthbound souls. But they are content with their earth-made ambitions, and with the easy virtue of pleasant, unheroic life, unmindful of the spiritual struggle that marks everywhere the upward road. Sometimes, because of mutual sympathy, they live together in groups of 3 or 4 or more, but more often man is attracted to woman somewhat as on earth, though there the bond is purely spiritual. Here I found living an aunt and a cousin of my own. On earth this lady had long presided over the house of my cousin, a wealthy banker, who, like her, never married. Their long and harmonious life together had produced an ease of intercourse that made its continuance natural. So in the spirit world I found them again, living contentedly and reproducing as far as might be the details of their earthly life. Even the good-natured superiority of the aristocratic class that they represented was reproduced in their new life, its narrow human sympathies, its entire respectability, and its rectitude. No atmosphere could well be more hostile to change. And their development had been slow, though my aunt's was clearly somewhat more rapid than my cousin's. He knew me, and evidently knew the conditions of my visit to the spirit world, for drawing me close to him, he said, "Caroline, you have done well." "Where is Aunt Herlig?" I asked. "She's out doing some work of mercy. She often goes out for that purpose," he replied. Evidently she had progressed far enough to set her feet on the right path. Here I also came across a girl recently arrived in the spirit world, who on earth had been one of my friends. She recognized me and seemed interested to see me. In talking with her, I felt that her mind was in a peculiar state of haziness concerning her own position. She had joined a number of friends and acquaintances from earth who had all lived in the same city and had all attended the same church. All of them were in the same confused and uncertain condition of mind. They had evidently banded together, as would a number of people from the same place when stranded in a strange country, surrounded by strange people and conditions. They kept together for mutual encouragement, advice, and to help each other solve their new problems. They gathered at regular intervals in the same meeting place, carrying on endless discussions in an attempt to arrive at some conclusion concerning the meaning of the whole affair, what they ought to do, and how it should be done. At their gatherings they observed some of the ceremonies and formalities which they used in their church services on earth. But these meetings always ended in a free-for-all discussion. I was present at one of these discussions, and it was interesting to see how eager all were to propound their own theories. One tall man would get up and, beginning with, "Well now, let me explain. This is the way I think it is," would go on for a while, when another would interrupt him with, "No, I don't believe it is so. Now I'm certain that this is the solution." And he would, for a time, propound his ideas, emphasizing his words with the pounding of his right fist against the palm of his left hand. He would have gone some way in his discourse when a woman would interrupt and express her doubt as to the preceding speaker's views, and so it went on until each had had his say. When they all had said something, they were no further ahead than when they had begun. Then they would disperse in all directions, only to drift back again to find out if anyone had received any new information. One thing I noted with particular interest. Many preferences and prejudices of earth still prevail there, though not intensely enough to hamper development. Thus the lives of race and nationality commonly prevail, but in a spirit of friendly mutual agreement. These seem the more closely to reproduce the ways of their former lives. I learned this when I asked why I saw no Orientals. Finding that they naturally preferred to live together, though they are under no compulsion to do so, I was impelled to visit their quarters. I found them living here much as they lived in their own lands, with houses and gardens in Oriental style, exercising the characteristic courtesy, grace, and hospitality which appeared in their delightful attentions to me. They gave me delicious fruit and a delectable drink. It was exceedingly delightful to walk in their lovely Oriental gardens, filled with specimens of exotic flowers, and I was delighted beyond measure with their entire treatment of me. I thought to show my appreciation by leaving with them some slight gift. This I quietly did, and believed I had succeeded in my plan. But on reaching the confines of this quarter, I was embarrassed to find one of my Japanese friends standing before me with my little gift. This he handed me with a smile and a low bow, and disappeared before I could protest. I did not, of course, see all of this first plane, but I saw enough to know that there every spirit is free to follow his own ideals and inclinations. His destiny is in his own hands, limited only by his past life. But since spiritual barriers are the strongest of all, class cannot mingle with class. Should an earthbound spirit stray into the region of higher souls, his darker aura would betray him, and a current, like an electric energy, proceeding from the first spirit he would meet, would sweep him back to his own place. There is but one path upward, that of personal effort to become fit for a higher type of existence. To this, the activities of the place are directed, and for this end, order and discipline prevail. No one is permitted to interfere with the efforts of others. On the whole, life is good and pleasant among those on the upward path, but words cannot express the dark hopelessness of the completely earthbound souls. I found no heaven nor hell except as it exists in the spirit. The second spirit plane. With my guide, I now passed on to the second spirit plane. This great realm I found to be merely a continuation of the first plane, except for the fact that there was no earthbound souls. Its inhabitants were working for higher attainments, and there were many spirit helpers to teach and assist and guide the steady flow of newcomers through their varied periods of residence until these learners were ready for higher planes. Thus, the inhabitants were constantly changing, as those who move upward were replaced by others. Life there was pleasant and varied to suit different tastes, some choosing to dwell in cities, others in the open country among the fields, delightfully established in their beautiful white houses of highly artistic architecture and ornamentation, situated in the midst of charming gardens filled with masses of the loveliest flowers. The higher spiritual attainments of this plane demonstrated itself by the bright and lighter hues of the aura, as well as by the elevation of the ideals of the new inhabitants. The dress of the women, I noted, resembled closely that of the spirit helper of the hospital, while the garb of the men was similar to that of my guide, a flowing garment, like a toga. For there is, in the second plane, no desire to garb oneself in clothes of the general earthly appearance, an evidence of the weakening of earthly ideals. We spent little time there. As I have explained, I visited the third and fourth planes before I went, at my own request, to the lower spheres. Hence, these two realms were the last I saw in the spirit world. The third plane. The third plane was a fair and glorious world, impossible of adequate description in the terms of our worldly speech. Those who there resided were highly perfected spirits, for to be admitted they must have reached an advanced stage of development. Nor was it possible that others should enter, for their mental states would have betrayed their presence. The light of this plane was of surpassing, all-pervading brightness, and, united with that given by each spirit, was dazzling in its brilliancy. Wonderful beauty everywhere enthralled the eye. The place was like a great garden with bushes and shrubbery of gorgeous hues and stately trees, some like magnificent palms, others of forms unknown on earth, as if nature and art had been perfectly blended to charm the eye. About the houses of the happy ones bloomed a wealth of flowers, whose rare and delicate colors vied with odor surpassing those of Araby the Blessed. There were no large cities there. The homes were placed in little groups of 2 or 3, like pearls in a rich setting of lawn and garden too fair for human words. Here and there rose stately edifices where large gatherings congregated to feel the influence of guides and teachers from higher planes, an influence exerted by speech or by subtler means. The dress worn there was very simple, only a flowing robe, sufficiently varied to emphasize the distinction between the men and the women. It was colored, as usual, by the aura of the wearer, the lighter and paler shades alone appearing, such as pink, pale orange, creamy, pale blue, white, and other colors too difficult to describe. The delicate hues of these robes and the multitude of colors in the blankets of flowers massed against the olive green of the landscape charged the dazzling air with beauty till the eye of the beholder was rapt by the harmony of sight, as in great music the ear is rapt by the harmony of sound. In this happy plain the inhabitants had solved the puzzle of universal brotherhood. Here, on earth, the subject of centuries of debate, and still impossible of full realization, not only were they dwelling in complete harmony, the dream of the altruist had been realized. Each lived for the other, since in that pure sphere the interests of all were one. There was, it is true, room for envy and jealousy in the great authority of the more intelligent, for in a perfect world all merit must be recognized, but the spirit from which envy springs did not exist there, for envy implies a selfish aim. In that spirit realm each knows that he has been accorded full justice, and each gloried in the greater merit of his fellow, while those of superior gifts humbly regarded their heritage as a privilege. Indeed, in that purer sphere, degrees of merit must have seemed trivialities compared with the boundless heights which beckoned beyond. Love and sympathy would permit no discord. From this plane come the helpers, the teachers, angels of mercy, who work among the less fortunate inhabitants of the lower spheres. This service, however, is an act of their own volition, proceeding from their sympathy and desire to serve, a benefice which results in their own further development. Spirit children. My keenest interest in the spirit world was aroused by my visit to the realm where dwell the spirit children who come thither in childhood. Around my experience in that realm cluster the most beautiful memories. There the spirit children grow through all stages of childhood and youth. All small children pass directly from earth to the third plane, to continue there their bodily and spiritual growth. My experience there was a wonderful revelation. The place was one vast garden of heavenly splendor, in which stood numberless magnificent buildings for utilitarian and recreational purposes. Women helpers who have known motherhood on earth cared with tender solicitude for the babies and little children. Older children were taught and guided with minute care and that never-failing kindness which, however, does not neglect discipline. Men and women helpers of various qualifications, superintended by superior spirits, carried on their appealing work. Naturally, no more perfect system could exist, nor could more ideal surroundings be imagined. Nothing but beauty met the eye, no ugliness could there distort the mind. Flowers of gorgeous hues and beds of rare designs, trees of perfect form and beauty, birds of varied plumage, fruits of delicious flavor, are but the more obvious privileges of that delightful land. Paths through shrubbery and across parks, divinely planned, led to playgrounds where those fortunate children were seen at play beside their helpers and teachers. It was an atmosphere of beauty, obedience, and love. I saw that the study of plants and flowers was an eagerly followed occupation, which was supplemented by the care of gardens in perpetual bloom. No sooner had a flower faded or been picked than another blossomed from the same stem. As I passed through the beauties and wonders of this place, my mind constantly sought for comparisons from earth. For earth, of course, was still my home. I found no satisfactory comparison. All was different. I thought, for example, of the ground on which I walked. Was it solid as on earth? To test it, I stepped from the path to the loose soil of the garden beds and jumped lightly up and down. The earth seemed to give way like swampy ground, but my feet did not sink, nor did they leave footprints as on earth. As if to fill my cup of joy in this lovely spot, I recognized among the children a sister of mine who died when but a few years old. As I was passing down a beautiful path, enthralled by the wonder of color and fragrance, I saw this young girl kneeling to pick up a flower. Something about her held my attention, and I gazed on her intently as I came nearer. She looked to be 16 or 17. She was clad in the simple white dress reaching just below the knee and leaving neck and arms bare. The sweet and serene beauty of her face was framed in a mass of blonde hair that fell loosely almost to her waist. She made a picture of appealing beauty as she bent toward the flowers, her transparent fingers encircling the stems. As I approached, she half turned her head, and for a moment we gazed into each other's faces. Instantaneously, I recognized her as that little child who had died on my lap, now a young woman of the spirit world. The look on her face was one of intense surprise, as if she were saying, "What? Are you also here?" Tender love shone in her eyes. My feelings seemed to overpower me. I strove to pause and speak, but some strange power held me silent and urged me on. I could not stop, but I turned several times to gaze on her, standing motionless, forgetful of the flower, looking intently after me with that same mingling of love and sweet surprise, till I passed from sight. Once more the curiosity of the earth moved me, and I wanted to taste the fruit I saw growing so beautifully there. No sooner had I wished than a hand reached out from the thick foliage and presented me with an apple. I did not see the owner of the hand. I tasted and found my senses thrilled with a delicious flavor like nothing on this earth. Leaving the land of children, I passed through other parts of this plain, where I moved among the throngs of exalted beings, the mansions without end, in the midst of stately gardens. My mind was full of amazement at the extent of this wonderful world, and the saying of Christ came to me, "In my Father's house our many mansions. The glories of that wondrous spirit land were incomparable. It seemed the best of all possible heavens, with its atmosphere of universal peace and sympathy and happiness. Love hovered over all. How delightful it was to pass abode after abode, watching the spirits enjoy the blessings reaped through victory over the evils and the tribulations of the past. Thrilled and enchanted by a scene of extraordinary tranquillity and charm, I could not refrain from speaking to a spirit who was sitting in his garden, resting against a tree, entirely surrounded by flowers and luxuriant vegetation of exquisite hue and fragrance. His eyes bespoke an equanimity of mind beyond mortal power to experience or conceive. From his face shone a radiant happiness, as if in reply to my expressions of amazement he said, "Yes, what an inexpressible joy it is to be permitted to dwell in these glorious realms after so much mortal agony, so many trials, such great tribulations, such piercing sorrows." Another desire came to me, to hear music. I was guided to a high structure of artistic architecture, whose entire top, arranged like a platform, seated a huge orchestra composed of all varieties of instruments, some familiar to me and others strange. Every musician showed himself a master of his art in the frequent concerts given by this as well as by numerous similar organizations. The music began, and immediately I was held entranced by its sweeping majesty and by its overwhelming emotional appeal. I could not endure it, perhaps because I was still on earth. Completely overcome, I had to be led away. My guide now wished to conduct me to a distant place, where there awaited something of great interest to me. Rising a little from the ground, the body at a vertical angle, we passed swiftly through space, impelled only by the agency of the will. Below us a marvelous panorama unrolled as we traveled on. The delicately colored spirit houses, with their varied architecture and wonderfully artistic ornamentation, seemed bathed in brilliant light of unearthly splendor. Around them spread gardens with flowers and shrubbery and trees, surpassing in color and design the most perfect creations of human landscape artists. At intervals, the great mansions and palaces for large gatherings rose among the trees, impressive in size, yet delicate in color and beauty of line. Against the vivid brilliance of flowers and olive green of the level lawns on which multitudes of spirits enfolded in their robes of light and many colors continually moved, these perfect creations rose to mold a harmony of form and color that caught and held the spirit like perfect music. Arriving at a wide flat of open ground, we saw in the distance what appeared to be a great bed of vari-colored flowers. We descended and approached. On nearing the spot, I discovered that what I had mistaken for a bed of flowers was in reality a great throng of women spirits, clad in brightly bright-colored robes. They were standing before a huge arched structure, apparently awaiting some event. I learned that they were the helpers waiting to be sent on their errands as angels of mercy, both to the earth and to the lower planes. Since I learned that this was but one place among many where the helpers received their directions, I concluded that there must have been myriads of these ministering angels, always ready to serve in the hour of need. Deeply interested, I approached to look more clearly at the spirits nearest me. I felt that they were indeed well fitted for the task for which they had volunteered. Their lovely and serene faces were eloquent with warm sympathy. The divine love and kindness that looked out from their eyes spoke clearly of the principle that animated all their actions. Words and demeanor told of their impatience to hurry to the work of service that irresistibly called. They made a splendid and delightful picture standing draped to the feet in robes of different colors, wearing a headdress also colored by their auras. This variety of the lighter and brighter color and the brilliant white light streaming from their faces, together with their exquisite feminine grace, produced an effect of marvelous beauty. A hush now fell on the gathering, and every eye turned with expectation toward three figures of authoritative presence which now appeared. These were male spirits from the higher planes who had come to direct the helpers. They were clad in shining garments and bore themselves with high dignity. They passed below the arch standing in front of the gathering and appeared upon its top, where they issued directions to the helpers, who immediately, singly and in groups, went eagerly on their way. I felt deep gratitude to my guide for the happiness of beholding this scene, which was to me a heaven far more real and comforting than any which I had conceived on earth. My time for leaving the third plane had now come, and I knew that I soon must return to re-inhabit my earthly body. But before that should come to pass, I implored my guide to give me at least a glimpse of the glories of the fourth plane. To my joy, he consented, saying, "You shall see." The fourth plane. As we descended in our approach to the fourth plane, my eyes were almost blinded by the glory of the spectacle. From every direction thronged troops of spirits, apparently converging on a great building of amazing size, beauty, and splendor. Each spirit seemed enveloped in a ball of flaming white light, emanating from himself, and giving to the brilliant light of this plane an additional splendor and force that to me became almost overpowering in its brilliancy. There the spirits were dressed in aural garments of varying colors, which the emanating light did not conceal. The women in robes falling in rich folds, the men in close-fitting garments. The scene was of marvelous beauty and indescribable brilliance. Almost at once, my guide brought me to the lines of the moving procession, and soon, with the rest, I entered the majestic hall toward which the spirits were thronging. It was an enormous auditorium, arranged in a semicircle about a raised platform. Without apparent ushering or other show of authority, the great throng found their accustomed places in the most orderly fashion. Seats were assigned to myself and my guide, and while we were waiting there expectantly, there was opportunity to study the assemblage. The foremost impression was that already mentioned of the inexpressible and overpowering brilliance produced by the natural illumination of this plane, the white splendor of the faces, the light about them, and the aura which colored their shining raiment in a multitude of hues. Not less striking was the mental impression produced by their faces, vivid with intelligence and power, and glowing with sympathy, love, and understanding. For these spirits had not only triumphed in self-mastery, they had attained wisdom, and a knowledge of mysteries of which I could only faintly guess. Conscious of my own unfitness, I felt myself fading into utter insignificance. Conversations and discussions engaged groups of spirits about me, discussions that appeared weighty and of intense interest. I noted here, as elsewhere in the spirit world, that men were in authority, but this gave them no actual dominion over women, for both take their proper places and both have their missions. The work of men is more creative. Women can serve and apply. Men are administrators. Women inspire to beauty and sweetness, and are angels of mercy, comforters, teachers, and mother spirits. Thus in the spirit world, the contrast between masculine and feminine is sharply defined in manner and custom as well as in dress. The modesty and grace of women is set over against the strength and authority of men. A hush now fell on the congregation, as 5 men in garments more shining than any I had yet seen ascended the platform and in turn began to speak. All present listened with rapt attention, hung upon their words, and unconsciously pressed closer, eager to know the wonders being unfolded. I could understand nothing. It exceeded my powers, but nonetheless I felt the influence and struggled to approach the wonderful strangers. My movements in the throng created some confusion, and I was rebuked and eyed with reproving looks, particularly as any spirit there could see and know that I was out of place. One spirit nearest to me exclaimed sternly, "This is the hall of learning, and no one is permitted to create any disturbance." However, my guide explained on my behalf, "This spirit has not yet passed over. For special purposes she is permitted here." This seemed to satisfy those about me, and I heard murmurs of understanding. I forced myself to master my excitement and remained quiet until the speakers finished. The great concourse broke up in orderly quiet, and my guide and I went on our long journey to the first plane, in accordance with my expressed desire. I saw little else of the 4th plane, but I was informed that life there was similar to life in the 3rd plane, though more developed, more perfect, and more glorious. My visit into the abyss of space. My trips to the various parts of the spirit world, it must be understood, were at different times, for otherwise I should have been too long absent from my body, which would have meant bodily death, and I would have been compelled to remain prematurely in the spirit realms. Thus, the last journey I made into the immense spaces of our universe occurred sometime subsequent to my return from the fourth plane. This seemed to me, by far, the longest journey I had made, as the 4 planes I had visited appeared to be not far distant from our solar system. Accompanied, as always, by my guide, I passed first through the spaces of our system. As we made our flight towards Venus, I beheld our Earth at such a distance that it appeared like a great big black ball. Saturn we passed so closely that we could perceive the little globes that compose its rings speeding about the larger sphere. Soon a huge black globe passed, or appeared to pass, as if pursuing Saturn. Like a lover following a dancing girl, I exclaimed, lapsing into human levity. My guide did not deign to notice my mild joke. "That," he said dryly, "is what you call Jupiter." When we passed over Venus, we floated in a horizontal manner, with face downward, close to the surface. When part way across it, we came to a complete standstill. Thus I was afforded a splendid opportunity to observe this planet at close range. It appeared to be a dark and dismal world, covered with a strange stunted vegetation, which showed gloomingly through the clouds of steam that rolled up from the surface of the planet. Myriads of insects flew about in great clouds. "What steam! What a mass of insects! Why, nobody could live here!" I exclaimed. Other than the insects, I could perceive no evidence of life. I saw no seas nor mountains. There was only barrenness, sterility. The whole scene was overpowering in its awful dreariness and utter desolation. We now left the solar system and penetrated far into the abyss of space, among the countless stars, moving with incredible speed and unimaginably multiplied in brilliancy because of our close proximity. The sight challenged imagination, but much as I marveled at this nearer view of these enormous material worlds, I wondered infinitely more at the countless living beings that filled the universe. Spirits of high superiority and authority, such as I had never seen even in the fourth plane, passed in every direction, singly and in larger or smaller groups. A white light of intense power emanated from each and enveloped them in a flaming radiance that varied in intensity in proportion to their spiritual power. All were garbed in glowing white. The combined brilliancy of the light thus produced flooded all space. The great whirling globes were as nothing to this awe-inspiring spectacle. The mere sight of these majestic spirits, even from afar, was enough to convince the beholder that they were the rulers and the controllers of the whole universe, of matter and of spirit. The overpowering dominance of their personalities subdued my spirit, so that, staring and stupefied, I trembled and shrank at their presence. Two, in particular, a man and woman spirit, burned with the light of two flaming suns, dimming all others near them with the intense luster of their white radiance. As they swept majestically by me, there flashed across my mind the words, "And there shall be no darkness in them." Dazzled, I cowered, raising my hand to my forehead in an involuntary tribute of humility and awe. It is impossible to say how far I was from them, since space does not limit the astral body. But near or far, I could clearly distinguish every expression of their countenances. They were dressed in magnificent robes of pure white. The dress of the female spirit was a long flowing robe, rippling from her form in loose and graceful lines, as she floated in a perpendicular position, inclined with knees slightly bent. The dress of the male spirit was a close-fitting toga that reached to his feet. He moved in a similar posture, but his head was thrown further back. His eyes, following the direction of his outstretched hand, were focused upon some great distant star. As he expounded to his companion some great mysterious truth, he seemed the embodiment of authority and wisdom, but on his features played the soft light of spiritual love, which tempered his austerity with its ethereal glow. But on his features played the soft light of spiritual love, which tempered his austerity with its ethereal glow. To me he seemed all-powerful, fitted to command instant obedience from any forces, material or spirit. His companion, though possessed of much of his spiritual power and authority, displayed these same qualities, but they were subdued by a feminine grace and loveliness which rendered her face sublime in its serene nobility. They appeared to be gods rather than perfect spirits, yet I was informed that they had once dwelt in human form somewhere. Whether their union began then or later I did not know, but now they were bound for eternity by the ties of spiritual attraction and love. By spiritual development they had risen to the highest power, and, as my guide explained, they were now a part of that supreme power that rules and guides both the material and spirit universe. The hosts of spirits gazed intently after them with respectful admiration and awe. It was a glorious moment for me when I beheld these marvelous beings and knew the happiness of their close presence. For a time I stood motionless and gazed after the disappearing glory, which lessened as these two beings passed from sight, till my eyes beheld in the distance only the white light that enfolded them. End of part 3, and end of my travels in the spirit world.